Hello and welcome to the second part of these vlogs about etched brass soldering. Today we're going to be talking about cutting out the pieces from the etched frets, folding and captive nuts, and obviously getting going with some soldering. So keep it to about half an hour. You can still watch part one back on my channel. Do like and subscribe and add some comments about what you'd like to hear about, or if anything wasn't clear I can come on and help. These are all here to help you get involved in soldering, to break the fear that you might have of it, or to just help you with some ideas to avoid some of the mistakes I made. So let's get going. So we need to remove these pieces from the fret, so obviously get ready to solder them, but we don't want to cut through the half edge. So you've got to have a good little look, because the little mini pieces which are left keeping the floor onto the actual sheet of brass is very similar, if not the same, to those half etched fold lines. So you've got to just have a little look at this, and before you start cutting anything, be very clear in your mind what's what. Now these pieces here which fold up, which I'm showing you, are actually there to retain the sides. Some people don't actually use them. You could even add little plastic card blocks or something to keep the sides at the correct width, but it's quite a nice little piece. So I keep those and fold them up, and therefore we need to cut here on the outer part of those and all the way around the outside. And the tool I use for these are the tin snips. Now one thing you will notice, even though these have got quite long blades, is this is a long piece. So I do tend to bend the brass away when I'm cutting it, so I can get to the next tab to cut it off. But we can't do that on this occasion, because right next to it we've also got another long thin piece which is going to go into these slots and tabs. The tabs will go into the slots, so I'm going to cut that away first and then come back to it. So we'll start with the tin snips. These just literally glide through it like butter. Really useful tool. Obviously keep your fingers well away and carefully cut it through until somewhere where you know, and you've felt that click at the end, somewhere where you know that that click, if the jaws snap together, isn't going to damage a piece. Okay. And of course you can go at it in many different directions, and usually go towards the the holes that are there already. So we can cut that piece off and cut this piece off. And when you come to a tab, try your best to get the jaws as close as possible to the tab. Now obviously not too close, because you'll start to cut the actual brass, but we don't want to leave a great big tab. We want to try and take it off like that, so that there is only a very minor indentation on the edge of the brass, which we'll take off with a file at the end. There are also some pieces here where the major pieces of brass have kind of just been joined together with major tabs, and in that case you can just fold it and it'll come apart, which may help you depending on what you're trying to cut out. Now we've got some details here, so I'm just going to chop near those to take them off, and leave them aside for a future moment. Often it's not worth taking all the details out at the same time, because you might well lose them or damage them. So keep them on the fret until you need them, because actually there's no need to get them out yet. So we'll do the same the other end. We'll use the 90-degree method here across, get as close as possible to that tab. I'll try my best to show you like that, and then the random bit of fret can then be potentially recycled, because it's brass, or binned, depending on what facilities you've got available. But actually you can also find that often these shapes and sizes can be useful for other things. So if you needed something that's about 4 or 5 mil wide, a strip later, then that could actually be useful. So depending on what shape come off, perhaps pop them aside into a spare parts bin. So on this one here, we've then got a very long piece next to another long piece. And so I don't really fancy going in with the tin snips, otherwise we're going to end up bending the whole thing. So I'm just going to carefully bend it back and forth along the axis of where I want it to go. And you obviously notice on this occasion we're left with the little tabs. You could go in with the tin snips just to take the very edge of those off, and you will gently get a bit off, but you're going to need a decent file, and then you're going to go alongside the grain, always the same direction. If you start coming back on yourself, you're going to end up probably catching the brass and ultimately bending it, which is not a good thing. So always go in the same direction, gentle, thought through strokes, not too hard, but obviously not too soft or you won't take anything off. And you'll start to see, and just keep your eye on it, start to see the brass tabs come away, and then they've gone. And of course, you can then polish that with a polish file, or if it's come out a little bit rough, so we could do that there if you really want to. It doesn't actually matter that one, you won't see inside the kit anyway, so we're not too bothered. Do the same the other side. Gently bend off that piece so we don't bend the actual board. Get in there with the tin snips just to take a little tiny piece off, and then we can use the file just to take the very edge off. Now in these, sometimes you'll find that the pivot holes are actually already drilled out for you. On this occasion we've got some pilot holes, so I'm going to take a drill. Now this is set up in this chuck for 10BA because I use it quite a lot, but just for the video I'll use a micrometer to tell you how big that is. It's a 2mm drill bit, which I tend to use for this. That's actually slightly larger than the 10BA screw will be. It gives you a little bit of flexibility just to solder that in. Now, I'm kind of lucky here because I have a kind of groove in the wooden top of this bench, so I can sometimes put something on top and drill through it. If you don't have that, you'll obviously drill into your board. Now, you might decide you have a piece of wood that you sacrifice for that. Could just be a piece of 2x1 that you had spare that you'll drill into. Obviously, if you drill into glass, this is sheet glass, it'll crack and all kinds of problems will happen. So think about what you're drilling into, because you will go through it. And it needs a surprising amount of effort really to get through some of these holes. But put the drill in, and I use this great big chuck. I mentioned it in the first episode of this, and you can then get through. It's surprising how long this will take. I'll try and do it as fast as I can, and there we go, and you'll feel it go through. Gently kind of pull the drill bit through a few times. You'll obviously end up with some mank on the back. Turn it over onto the back and gently file that away so that it's like that. You can kind of put the drill in again and keep filing it until it's nice and flat. You'll need it flat because otherwise the little captive nut that we will solder over this hole won't sit correctly square, and then ultimately the bogey pivot won't be square either, and then you'll find that the carriage won't run very well, so or derail. So we need to make sure it's nicely back to square. So there we go, and we'll do the same with the other one, but you don't need to see that on the video, so I will do that aside. So looking then at this piece, we cut off the end, but we do still have a tiny little bit of the tab left. Might be able to see that there. So I'll just go in again with a big file, second cut, big file, away from your body, so if you do slip, it doesn't hurt you, and just gentle strokes until you can literally see it almost dissolving away in front of your eyes. There it is. And the other end's actually pretty good, but I will just give it a little file. And if you don't do that, of course, you'll end up with a little bump there. And when you go to put your end on it, it won't fit nice and snug against it, or it will bulge out in the middle, and it won't look very good. So you need to spend a little bit of time just cleaning up that. And then do keep an eye once again on the insides of those folds. Now, these here have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tabs. So the chances of that going awry when we bend it are actually quite minor. So I'm not going to bother with the hold and fold on this occasion. And I'm literally, all I'm going to do is take my piece of glass that we know is square, and literally together, 2 fingers, I'm going to have to bring the camera down slightly for you. I'm literally just going to push it until it's 90 degrees. Voila. and you can use your eye to look down alongside the edge just to make sure that's at 90 degrees, and then that's basically ready for a bit of soldering. But what we will do first is just get the fiberglass brush. It's a brand new kit, but straight away you can see that we started to get kind of finger marks and those kind of things on there. They're not very good for getting the solder to really flow, so we'll just run the fiberglass brush. I probably should have done this before I folded it, actually, thinking about it, but I wasn't concentrating, along that edge just to get rid of any rubbish and blow away, or use the little brush, those little fiberglass evil little pieces, otherwise they'll get in your fingers and it is the devil to get them out. Okay, the other parts we'll have in the kit, of course, are the sides. Now sometimes you will find that you will see drop lights. They're literally the drop pieces which go inside. I've lined one up broadly there, inside the doors or inside a window frame, and they are the actual window that you can drop down, usually with a kind of leather piece, and they have a slightly recessed kind of window frame, so it's a separate piece of brass that we will solder on inside. That's to come. There are often half etched kind of nice details, which is one of the real benefits of etched brass, so you're getting the door look there. We've got some pre-drilled holes for handrails already and that kind of stuff. This is quite a simple coach, so there's actually not much panelling along it, but often you'll find beading and different types of coaches of different styles. Obviously, some of them will come as a separate top piece with the windows and a bottom kind of lower body side, and you have to put them together and solder them at the back. But this is quite a simple coach. So in terms of getting this out of the etch, back to the tin snips, we use the same approach here on the edge, getting as close as possible to the tabs and popping it out. Easy, put that in the bin. But when we've then got a long piece, and on this occasion I don't have another long piece next to it, so I don't worry so much, I tend to, gently using a finger to avoid bending the actual coach side, just bend away the fret there, so you can really get the tin snips in to attack the little tab. You'll find that if you don't do that, then you start to it starts to be difficult to keep it straight, and it starts to affect kind of it starts to foul on pieces of this tin snip. So I bend it back, and in that case you've then got a lot more space around it to get in and to gently do it. And we haven't bent the side. And of course, you remember you can do it from both sides and upside down. So you know, you just look at which is the right way to get at something without affecting the main piece, which of course is the body side. So there we go. Whole thing's off. That can be binned, etc. And we've got the fret away. Now on something as thin as this body side and as long, you've got to be really careful taking these tabs off. And in that case, I might use a slightly smaller file to just locally attack the tabs rather than the great big one, because you might find you bend the thing. So I just use a little local file. Again, it's important to get these tabs off, or the roof won't sit straight when you're trying to solder that on later, or if it's a plasticard roof, depending on what you're doing there, it won't sit and it will look wrong as well. So yeah, we need to do this. A little bit of a faff, but it's kind of cathartic, just getting those off. There we go. And then we can obviously do the ends as well. I've done that one. This end here, just get in, same effect, and keep doing it until you've got the main pieces. And of course, the first pieces we're going to need are the floor. And there's also, often in these Worsley Works kits, pieces that look like this. Now these are the pieces which will actually solder inside the ends of the coach, and you'll have another captive nut over here which will meet with this piece, so they'll sit like that on top, and this hole will line up with this hole. And the designer, who's Alan, who's a good friend of mine, actually has given us a bit of extra space there by making this not just a circular hole, but a slightly oval one. So you've got a little bit of give in there, which is good of him. And these will then sit on top and allow the floor to be bolted effectively directly onto the body. But obviously you can then undo that screw and get at something for maintenance, or if you later want to get in there, etc. So we're going to take those pieces off. Now, this is I don't know if it's a tip or a trick, or it's just a bit laziness on my part, to be honest, but they do have both a back piece, which folds at 90 degrees to meet the side, and also some wings, which are to go along the very ends of the sides. Now, I find aligning those in the way that the kit's been built to be extremely hard. I say extremely hard, I just mean it takes a lot of exactitude to get them perfect. And I don't feel, in all reality, they lend an awful lot, because once you've added a fillet of solder to this 90-degree bend, they're really pretty strong. And I don't feel they need these, and you can spend quite a long time faffing about getting these exact between the width of the coach for not really any real benefit. So I actually chop these off. Shock horror, but I find you don't need them. So I'm going to be a bit naughty, and I'm literally going to look at where the half etch line is. I'm literally going to just chop all the way along it and do the same on the other one all the way to the end. Let that drop. So I've removed those tabs, or wings I like to call them. I did do it once, but I felt brought nothing and added an awful lot of faffing about having to get it exact, when in all reality it didn't bring much benefit. So we'll chop those off, and we're going to need these, and we're going to need the floor for the next stage of the build. One last point to just mention whilst we're cutting things out is that when you're cutting out and you get to a tab, it's obviously really important you don't cut the tab off. It would be quite simple to just cut straight through. So pay attention to where you see these kinds of tabs, and you only want to get in and clip off the top piece above the tab, leaving the tab in place. So I thought it might actually be quite useful if you saw the end result of one of these kits. So this is currently in primer and is a similar version that I have built in the last year or so. This is actually an observation end, but the principles are exactly the same. So we have a soldered roof, soldered ends, soldered sides. We've got the drop lights in. I actually added some window bars, which is prototypical as well. Here you can see what I was just talking about, these end side pieces which attach this body to the floor. And I've added a quick interior and a couple of partitions there as well. Here's the holes for the bolts to go through, and then they will attach on the other side. Here are some captive 10BA nuts which we use as bogey pivots, and you can also see the footboards which have been put on. Now, the prototype for these Vale of Rydal coaches actually have some very, very thin brackets which hold these footboards, these checkered footboards, away from the body side. I decided, in a kind of moment of pragmatism, that it would be far stronger to actually just directly solder these to the body side. And although that isn't exactly correct to the prototype, it is an awful lot stronger and hardly noticeable. So I think that in all, that's probably a useful pragmatic way forward, really. And then this will go inside the ends like that. You'll see the piece here, which I've just folded a minute ago, which actually retains these sides. They're actually pretty straight anyway, but retains the sides from the end, and then they will clip in like that. It's freshly painted, so ready for chocolate and cream livery. Well, actually ready for the other two coaches first, and then I'll paint them together. But this was the kind of experiment, and you can then add your own detail. I added some wire on the end to show the I think it's the pull cord, the emergency pull cord. And also one of the lovely things you can do in etched brass is they've actually etched the rain strip on top of the roof there, which is very, very nice. So a lovely little coach, pretty simple. It's a box with a few screws and bolts on it, and then as many details as you'd like, and a plasticard interior. Okay, so I've now cleaned up these little 90-degree sections. I probably need a name for them, but they're basically going to sit over there, and then this flap here needs bending up 90 degrees. Now, I bent this one very easily because it had its own little tabs and was quite easy to bend. This is less so. If you try and bend this on your own now, what will happen is that the actual rest of the brass here will bow out and it won't be square. So a couple of things we can do about that. First thing is to get a sharp knife and to score along the half etched line. Obviously be careful of your fingers, the usual rules apply, and we're going to just score along here a couple of times, and obviously make sure you go the whole distance with a consistent kind of feel and to it, until you start to see on the other side, and hopefully you can see that on the camera, that you start to see the score being visible on the other side. At that point, stop, because if you do any more, it'll just fall off. But that will help us bend it, because what we've effectively done is deepened that half etched line. Now we're going to put a fillet of solder, which is just a long seam of solder along there, once we've folded it, so that will strengthen it back up. But for the minute, we actually need to de-strengthen it to make it easier to fold. The same is true, obviously, with the other one. We'll do exactly the same. Probably 3 or 4 long strikes until you start to see it coming through the other side. Lovely. Now for this, I'm going to use the hold and fold because it's just the easiest way of doing it. We have 2 little thumb screws here, and this will make a really excellent fold around this very sharp edge here. So we're going to pop these in and feed them up until you get to the half etch line. Obviously do it so that you're folding up, and we'll then start to, these thumb screws are lovely because you can just start to tighten them up until you're exactly right, and make sure it's square like that, and then really tighten them until they're max tightening. And then you literally just perhaps on my piece of glass here, I'll then fold it around to 90 degrees. Sometimes you go a little bit too far, sometimes you don't get quite enough, but you can keep coming back to it until it's folded like that. Hopefully you can see that there. Nice fold, all straight, happy days. Undo the thumb screws. I actually did a bit tighter, and we have a nicely folded 90-degree piece with pretty decent right angle bend there. And this piece has not bowed in the way it would have done had we not scored it and used the hold and fold. And then what we're going to do is we're going to then add a fillet of solder to the inside there, and we're going to add a captive nut. And I'm just going to set up the soldering iron now, which takes a couple of minutes just to heat up, clean it, get all the bits out, etc. for that, and I'll be back in a sec. So welcome back. We've got the soldering iron going, and we're now up to the 400 on the temperature controlled display there. Here's the actual iron. Obviously this is on now, so safety first. I did just want to show you the smoke absorber. I talked about this in the last video. I'm going to turn it on so you'll hear the wee of it, and this drags away the smoke. Now the best way to show this is actually with the multi-core solder. We're not going to use this for this kit, but and you'll hopefully be able to see when the smoke comes off, see how it astonishingly just gets drawn directly into the smoke absorber. Really clever bit of kit and good for health and safety. Okay, so at the start of every session we'll use the tip cleaner. So I'll just turn this quickly on and we'll use that. You'll see the smoke from it actually going into the smoke absorber there. And we just use a tiny amount and then use the sponge over here just to clean that off. and you get a very, if you can see that against the radiator, a very kind of silvery, shiny coating onto the tip, which gives it, it really helps it conduct the heat and clean it. So we only need those at the beginning of the session. Good, so the first thing I will do is show you actually how to do a fillet of solder. So we talked about these 90-degree pieces, which I still don't have a name for. I'm going to call them end brackets from thence on. And what we're going to do is put a fillet of solder just to strengthen up that fold that we've recently made. So we'll get the phosphoric acid flux. I've got a blue, it's a Tamiya thing that sits on the bottom to stop it, well, to try and prevent it from being knocked over. Why have I got that? Because once I knocked it over and it caused a right old mess. So that's to try and give it a bit more strength. And we're just going to use, and I might have to bring the camera down slightly first. There we go. We're just going to use the Manky old brush to run a consistent seam of flux along the edge there. That's all you need. Happy days. 145 solder. I just tend to leave a piece hanging like that, which we can put there. The solder. Get the iron. Little quick clean on the sponge. You'll hear it hiss, so you'll know it's on. Little bit of solder like that, and we're just going to put it into this seam. Now, obviously, brass is hot, and therefore, if I'm going to hold this with my finger and solder it, I'm going to get hot. So we will use a couple of different methods. You could use something like some, if I did this on the less slippy wood, you could use these pliers just to hold it down. You could pop a piece of cork on top and then put your finger on top of that, as I mentioned in the previous video. Various methods. I think I'll use the pliers for now because they happen to be in my hand. Doesn't really matter as long as it doesn't move. And then we're just going to dump right in the middle straight away and let the solder iron come away a bit of solder. And we've effectively created a little pool now that we can then distribute in either direction. So we're then going to heat it up again, let it get molten, and just drag it along the seam and do it the same on the other direction. Now this kind of approach of putting a big piece on first, letting that set, and then melting it again and using the flux to kind of drag it away is really helpful, because it means that you can quickly attach, some people call it tack soldering, and quickly attach a piece with only a tiny amount of solder actually attaching it. Check it's in exactly the right position before then properly soldering it on. And it will avoid the piece getting too hot or indeed melting other things. So I'll bring this up to the camera so you can just see it. And we have got a seam of solder there, and then that is properly strong. And you know, if we'd gone back to this before it had the seam, you know, that I could just bend off now. This is really nice and strong and 90 degrees. Happy days. The other thing we need to do is to put the captive nut into this hole. So we will get a brass nut. Obviously it's important it's brass or it won't solder. A steel nut will be no use here. They need to be brass. It could be nickel silver, but brass is the one you'll see most. And we're going to need to pop that on there. Now, you could of course try and get it in exactly the right position and tack solder it and mess about, take you forever. What I tend to use is a cocktail stick. Now, I actually chop off the very end, the last kind of couple of mil off the end of that. And then I put the 10BA bolt, that's a nut, sorry, onto the cocktail stick, a bit like that. And then that allows me, one, this cocktail stick is wood, so it's not going to conduct heat. And secondly, it gives me the ability with my left hand, because my right hand will have the soldering iron in, to get it in exactly the right place and to feel my way, because the poking through piece of the cocktail stick will be in the right place. Now, some people put oil and stuff inside it to avoid solder getting in the thread. I don't bother with that. I just tap them out afterwards. So same approach is true. You need a decent amount of flux from your flux over here. Keep the top on when you're not using it. With the paintbrush, put it around the hole. Put the top back on, even when you're filming. And then I actually use this groove again because I need to poke it through slightly. And then we'll get the soldering iron nice and clean. Get a little bit of solder on the end. Don't actually need that much, and you can keep coming back for more if you need it. Pop the cocktail stick. It's going to be hard for you to see, but I'll do my best for you to see that. Pop the cocktail stick on, and then don't solder the whole thing on at once. Just get a little bit of solder on. You can hear it hiss, which means the flux is burning off. And hold it still for, probably needs 5 seconds or something like that, until it's hardened. It has, you'll know because you lift it up. And then you can look through the other side, and due to the fact I was trying to film this at the same time, it's not actually very good, but it shows you it's not quite in the centre. So now I know it needs to go up a little bit. So I will come back with the soldering iron, and I will reheat this to melt the little bit of solder that I put on. If I put a whole lot of solder on, this would have been a right kerfuffle. Move it up, let it set, come back, and you can now see that the cocktail stick is absolutely bang on in the middle of the hole. But we're not finished, because now we want to harden that up by soldering the rest around, and obviously not moving it from the position it's in. So I usually go back with a bit more flux at this point. Just helps that solder to flow around. And we're not going to be too bothered about what this looks like because it's inside. It doesn't need to be particularly neat. So we'll get a decent amount of solder on our iron, and we will let it flow whilst keeping the cocktail stick in place all the way around the nut. Let that set. Still hot. Fail, but this wasn't that hot, so all good. And then we can take that out, and you can see that if I bring it right up, you can see the thread, hopefully. If I tap on that to attempt to focus it. Getting better at this each time, but still not an expert, so sorry about that. But there it is, this thread inside. And then we'll get the tap out. We'll pop away the tin slips, don't need those at the moment. So I mentioned this again in the first video, so you're very welcome to go and view that. This is the 10BA tap, make sure we get the right size. And we're literally just going to pop that into the nut. Keep it 90 degrees, of course, in all angles. So straight and straight that way as well. And we'll literally turn it through. You could put that in the chuck of the pin vise, but don't actually need to, just use your fingers. And you'll see a tiny amount of solder comes off on the tap there. And then we have a tapped captive nut in our little bracket. And that is a crucial part of the kit because it allows us to then attach the body to the chassis via that, and it will go through that hole there, and a bolt will attach the two things together. Happy days. So that concludes episode 2. Please do like and subscribe, add your comments. Very welcome to feedback, and see what you'd like to see next time. But we'll certainly be looking at attaching the sides and ends, adding those brackets to the ends and the drop lights, and potentially getting on towards the roof. Thanks.